Hello and welcome to this chess opening video. So what is the best chess opening? This is part 2. I did kind of a long rant on the first video, part 1, which kind of went almost an hour, so I'll try and keep this one a little bit shorter. What is the best chess video? Feel free to leave comments, or what is the best chess video? What is the best chess opening? Feel free to leave a comment with whatever you think the best chess openings are. But I would argue that the best chess opening depends on your chess ability, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced, or a chess master. That definitely makes a difference. So, whatever your chess ability and playing strength is, that's going to determine a lot what the best chess opening is for you. And your playing style. If you are an attacker, you might want to play e4 openings or play gambits where you get a quick attack going. If you're more of a strategic defensive player, then you might want to play d4 or something that's less crazy than some of the gambits out there. But either way, the game can be steered into what you don't want. That's always possible, even at a cost. So, if somebody knows that you're a strategic player, they could sacrifice some material to open the game up. And usually it's good to, grab that material if it looks like they're giving up too much material. Then you could get an advantage that way, but then you could be stuck playing in a tactical game when you didn't really want that. Anyway, one thing I wanted to go over when talking about what the best chess opening is, memorization. It's better to learn general opening strategy and principles and general chess strategy and principles, because you can't memorize everything. There's just too many openings to memorize everything. And at some point, you're going to be stuck and have to think on your own. So study tactics, study strategy, and end games, and that can help you figure out what to do. Now, if somebody has a great memory, they might be able to just remember more lines and theory in the different openings. But somebody who's not as good with memorization, and I didn't bring this up in the first video, so I wanted to do this second video to mention there are opening systems that you can play where you don't have to memorize as much. You just start out with a kind of an opening system against almost anything that your opponent plays. So one example would be d4, and then here we'll play the most often played move, knight to f6. Well, then you could go for the Jobava-London system, where you want to bring a pawn to d4, a knight to c3, and your bishop up to f4. So the most often played move is d5, because if they don't play that, you could grab the center with both pawns in the center. So this discourages you from pushing your e-pawn. And now the most played move is this bishop to f4 move. Here, this is called the queen's pawn opening Chigorin variation, but it has become more well known as the Jobava-London system. So system openings, for beginners that aren't sure what those are, you just develop your pieces in a formation. They can be called formation openings or system openings. And your opponent can do many different moves, but you're kind of doing the same moves usually. Now, you still have to watch out for tactics or weird moves that might be out of the ordinary, but then usually you can punish those. So the most often played move here is a6 to prevent this knight from jumping to b5 and targeting this pawn along with the bishop. So that's one of the strategies with this Jabava London system. And then e3, now that you've brought the bishop outside of the pawn chain, you can play e3 to help fortify your central pawn. Most often played is that black does likewise, but they've kept their bishop inside the pawn chain. So your bishop is a little bit better than theirs, which is, if we're comparing light squared bishops, then your light squared bishop will be better, of course. But your bad bishop is outside the pawn chain where theirs is not. So now it looks like most often played is an immediate g4 pawn push, getting ready to attack the knight. So then c5, that is ignored in favor of attacking the knight. The knight drops back, and then white just develops the other knight. Black develops, and then h4 here. And immediately we have a pawn storm. I could play this out a little bit further. You're attacking on the king side. Black is attacking on the queen side. And it's kind of a race with the pawns. Bishop to b7, bishop to h3. Knight is under attack. So the knight moves forward. And then we have g6 trying to slow down this kingside attack because it looks like white could still castle queenside even though these pawns are starting to roll forward. But what is black going to do? Already there's some weaknesses being created on the king side and the queen side is really open. So here, queen to e2 is played, queen to a5. Now b3 to block the scope and kind of slow down this attack. Block the scope of the queen in case white does decide to castle over here. Let's see, capture. Knight jumps forward. The queen is now attacking this unprotected pawn. So we have a capture. That is ignored in favor of a counterattack over here lining up on the king. So capture, bishop captures. So anyway, I kind of played that out further than I had to. But let's go back to the beginning. So the Jabava London system opening is d4. Your opponent could play d5 immediately. And then you play knight to c3. A lot of times they'll play this to prevent you from pushing the pawn. And then you develop your bishop. And then from this point, you just have to play maybe different move orders slightly, depending on what your opponent does. But let's say they just play this move. Well, then you can play here and you're getting ready maybe to jump up and target this pawn in the future with the bishop and the knight. But there's a possibility of pinning. That can be ignored. But you get the idea. You have the knight, d4 pawn, and bishop on f4. And then from here, you just have to learn the ins and outs of that different opening. Okay, I'll show you a couple more system openings, and then I can wrap this video up. Another d4 possibility is d4. Let's say they play knight to f6. Well, you could play knight to f3 if they decide to push this. There is this possibility. Going here, blocking in your bishop. If they do likewise, well, now you can go here, and you're in the Kali system. So another interesting opening that is a system opening, you'll bring your knight to f3. The other knight will go to d2 to back it up and also to help cover the e4 square along with the bishop to keep this knight out of there. So now if c5 is played, here you have options. You can play b3, or if you're a more defensive player, you could even play c3, and you create a triangle set up here. If the knight develops, this c3 move also prevents this knight from jumping here and harassing your bishop. If they capture here, generally you want to capture this way instead of capturing towards the center like general chess strategies dictate, because you'll be left with a half open E file to attack with, and they'll have a half open C file. So here, knight at b to d2 is usually played, and you're ready to castle as well. So we could go a little bit further. Bishop to d6, castling, and we see you're getting your pieces developed pretty well, castling. And the best chess openings, as I mentioned before, allow you to develop your pieces quickly, control the center of the board, castle quickly, and also allow you to place your rooks on open, half open files or behind pawns that you plan to push forward in the future. So after capture, here another recommendation, and the number one played move, is to capture this way. Then once the bishop captures, to push in the center and attack. That is usually ignored, and queen to c7 is played. So then white develops his queen. h6 is played to keep pieces out, keep the knight out of g5, to prevent this bishop and maybe the knight and everything piling up on h7. So h3, kind of preventing the knight from launching forward, giving the king room to breathe. And now, what do we have? Knight to h5. Jumping to the side, maybe making way for this f pawn to push forward. So knight to b3 attacks the bishop. Oh, this is interesting. A little attack here. Queen has to run away, and then the rook can be captured. But it looks like usually this is played. Bishop captures, and instead of going after the rook, the bishop pair is knocked out. Queen captures, and bishop to d6. So anyway, an interesting way that the game could have gone. But this was the Kali system. Another interesting opening system that you might want to try and play. I'll go back here and look at, instead of a d4 opening, you could try something, even more different. Let's see. If you're familiar with the King's Indian defense, there's also the King's Indian attack. So let's see if I remember this one. If e4, e5 is played, well, you could try something like this. Let's say they attack, you just defend. If they want to keep attacking, now they're saying to bring this up. Capture, capture, bishop to c5. Let's see. They recommend this h3 move to keep the knight out of here, because it would target the f pawn. So black castles, knight develops, queen to e7 to protect this pawn, bishop develops, and now what? Rook to d8, pinning the knight to the queen. The recommendation is knight to h4. But that kind of got crazy in a hurry. So let me go back. Maybe there's a quicker way to do this. So knight to f3. If knight to f6 is played, well, maybe you just do this immediately. So if they do the same, both sides fianchetto. White can already castle, as does black. So this here is known as a King's Indian attack, where this is a King's Indian defense setup. So you could play this system as white or black. With black, it's a King's Indian defense, and with white, it's a King's Indian attack. And then a lot of times there'll be something like, let's see here. This can be played quite often. If they play d5, well, now you can't push this immediately, but you can bring your other knight up here and get ready to push this. c5, gaining space, and then e4. So, something like this, a King's Indian attack setup. So I just want to I just want to let you know, if you're trying to figure out what the best chess opening is, once again, it depends on your level of chess playing ability. A beginner needs something more simple. It depends on, how good your memory is. And I wouldn't recommend trying to memorize a bunch of lines. Pick one good opening with white, one good opening with black, and try and just get that opening down, become familiar with the different options that are usually played in that opening. So you familiarize yourself with the opening, and the best chess opening is pretty much whatever you are most comfortable with. If you're an attacker, you might like wild, crazy attacking openings. If you're more of a defensive player, you might just want something more strategic. Like with black, a Caro-Kann might be a more defensive opening. If you're an attacker, you might like the Sicilian defense as black. With white, e4 openings if you like to attack, maybe d4 or c4 if you like more strategic maneuvering games. And if your memory is not so great, or you just don't want to memorize a bunch of lines, then you can try one of these system openings. There's also the regular London system, which is usually like d4, d5, something like this. So what do they play? A lot of times that, and then you can just play e3 immediately. And let's see, if they play c5, c3 can be played to back up that central pawn. Knight develops, and then the knight usually develops here instead. Bishop outside the pawn chain. Queen attacks the undefended pawn. So queen to d7, creating a battery and protecting this pawn. Knight up to f3. And then, this could be played attacking the queen. So after a queen retreat, e6. But anyway, this is normally called the London system. Now it's saying it's just an Indian game. But if we go back here, accelerated London system. And in these system openings, you want to set up the pieces in the same formation, so they could be called formation openings as well. But you might do it in different move orders. So if we go back to the beginning, there's transposition in chess where you start out in one opening and go into another. Maybe you start off like this, a ready opening, and then they go here, something like this. And now you might bring this up, and we just have the London system. So we started off with the ready opening, and we go into this London system, this formation where we're bringing a knight to f3, bishop to f4, pawn to d4. The most often played move is an immediate attack. and then the pawn is defended. So if they capture, you can capture with a pawn and have a strong pawn in the center. So they add more pressure. That is ignored for the moment and just develop the other knight. And we see this is a little bit different than the Jabava London system, where this knight is usually placed on c3. On c3, the knight controls the center a little bit more. On d2, it helps cover this e4 square. But also, if your knight decides to jump forward at any point, this knight can jump up here to f3 and take its place. And also, by going to d2 with the knight and not c3, you don't block in the c pawn, which might need to move forward. So after capture, recapture, and now bishop to f5, getting outside the pawn chain, now c3 is played, preventing the knight from jumping forward, fortifying the central pawn. And now we have e6, and once again this queen to b3 move, queen to c8 guarding this, knight attacks the pawn, or excuse me, the bishop. And then this is interesting. That was played most often. Capture, capture. Now this knight is on an outpost, but it can be chased away with pawn to f3. But usually the knight just drops back. Bishops fight each other for this diagonal. And after capture, capture, white brings his bishop up. Queen gets off the back rank. Finally, white castles, as does black. Queen creates a battery. h6 is played to keep that pawn from capture. And now queen to e2. So here we see a case where the half-open e-file can be used by white, and maybe the half-open c-file can be used by black. Here, that was played most often, followed by this, maybe to prevent this pawn from pushing forward. Rook at b, or excuse me, now that was played, but knight to e5, capture. Anyway, the best chess openings, once again, are whatever you feel the most comfortable with based on your playing strength, what level of chess player you are, and your playing style, whether you like quiet strategic games or crazy attacking games or something in between. And if you're not sure, you can go over games by different chess masters, and if the openings look interesting to you, try them out. See if it's something that you would like to play in the future. So you can pick a chess hero, a famous chess master that you like their playing style and their openings, and you can try and emulate them. Just remember that chess masters are at such a high level that it might be harder to understand their openings and their moves. So if you're going to do that, and especially if you're a beginner, you might want to look at older chess master games, from maybe like 50, 100 years ago or more. The older chess masters are a little bit easier to understand. Their games might not be as complicated as today's chess masters that use computers, and they find crazy computer moves that don't make sense at first, but the computer's calculated it out 10 moves, and they know that it's a good move. All right. Anyway, one last thing. If your memory is not so great, or you just don't have time to memorize a bunch of different opening variations, then try a system opening like the London system or the Kali system, and there are others you can check out. And also, don't waste too much time on openings, because no matter how much of an opening you memorize, you're not going to be able to remember everything. So if you spend more time on strategy and tactics, especially, because you could have 10 moves memorized and you play perfectly, and then all of a sudden you don't know what to do on the 11th move, but you've studied strategy and you have a great strategy, and you're maneuvering, but then you overlook a simple tactic. Well, that could just mess up the game right then and there. So definitely study tactics, study strategy, study the end game, and take a look at master games, and also go over your own games. If you're learning an opening, pick one good opening for white, one good for black, depending on what your opponent does, and try, each game to maybe go one move deeper. Especially if you make a mistake, then do a little research and figure out, what you could have done better, and hopefully, over time you'll improve. All right, well, feel free to leave a comment with whatever you think is the best chess opening, what openings you like and prefer. Maybe I could do a video on those openings in the future. Also, please like and subscribe if you haven't already to support the channel. And thank you for watching. Have a super chess day.